May 10, 1972. 7:30 a.m. The deep roar of 30 U.S. Navy aircraft from the carrier Constellation rumbles through the skies of North Vietnam. It is the first assault of a focused, intense air campaign against the North, aimed at crippling the communist invasion of the South.
In 1972, the North Vietnamese invaded South Vietnam. This set in motion a new phase of the air war called Linebacker, where the United States went north, mined the harbors, and precipitated a massive air campaign to bomb targets in North Vietnam.
A strike package of A-6 intruders and A-7 Corsairs target petroleum storage tanks in the port of Haiphong. F-4 Phantoms of VF-92 fly escort. Lieutenant Kurt Dosay is among them. He flies wingman for flight lead Lieutenant Austin Hawkins. At a predetermined point, Hawkins and Dosay peel off from the bombers.
The hook point that Hawk initially picked was right over a 100-millimeter battery that opened up on us. The AAA was popping these big, black, swirly flak bursts around us.
As Dosay and Hawkins move away from the flak battery, a radio call breaks the practiced routine of the mission.
Red Crown, the cruiser in the Gulf of Tonkin, started making MiG calls and called bandits, blue bandits, bullseye 040 at 70.
This code is how Red Crown calls out radar contacts. Blue Bandits means MiG-21s, the North's most advanced fighter. Bullseye is Hanoi. 040 is the bearing, at 70 miles. There are MiG-21s to the northeast, 70 miles from Hanoi. That means Kep Airfield.
We immediately came hard right, went into combat spread, ran it up to full military power, and started heading for Kep Airfield.
In minutes, the Phantoms arrive at Kep. Dosay quickly spots two MiG-21s with their engines on, waiting to taxi onto the runway.
I was trying to plot a course and wondered whether I could swing around and shoot a Sidewinder at them while they're holding short of the runway. And while I'm doing this mental exercise, my radar intercept officer, Jim McDivitt, calls out two MiGs on the roll.
They're actually rolling down. They're halfway down the field. Kurt immediately took action. He was very aggressive anyway, and he just turned right away.
Both Phantoms wing over to pounce on the rolling MiGs.
Because we had made this sudden descent from 6,000 down to the deck, and it's a very humid environment, suddenly my cockpit was just filled with fog coming out of the vents. And so I'm flying blind at supersonic feet, 50 or 100 feet off the runway, with the Sidewinder growling in my ear.
Unfazed, Dosay reaches down and dumps the air conditioning to clear the cockpit. The MiGs lift off the runway. Warned of imminent danger, they punch off their external fuel tanks and brake left. The F-4s give chase.
We were still extremely low, below 50 feet to the terrain. I remember raising my wing a couple times to go over trees. By the time the first MiG had turned about 30 degrees, we had come from a lag pursuit position and pulled around into a perfect Sidewinder firing position of about 1,500 feet.
Dosay squeezes the trigger on his stick. The AIM-9D Sidewinder's solid rocket motor ignites.
It immediately made a hard 90-degree turn towards the inside of the circle. And I originally thought that it was going stupid, that it had a guidance failure or a fin failure or something. I was going to pull in and shoot again, and glanced over, and here came the Sidewinder back into the fight. It came in and went right behind the MiG and fired its warhead, but it basically missed the MiG.
Dosay fires a second missile.
It did the same thing, went inside the circle, came around. But this one, right at the end, it sort of took an extra turn, went right up the tailpipe. There was a 1 potato, 2 potato, and then a big orange fireball.
It is Kurt Dosay's first kill and the first victory of this historic day. But there's still one MiG left. Dosay asks McDevitt if the radar-guided Sparrow missiles are tracking.
Throughout a lot of that engagement, I was down trying to get a radar lock, and the guy got very frustrated because I never was able to break them out.
On the deck, there's too much ground clutter for the AIM-7's radar to get a lock. But Dosay has an idea.
I told Hawk that I was going to shoot a Sparrow in front of him to get him to turn in front of Austin, and he could have gotten the shot.
To accomplish this, Dosay will pitch the nose up and barrel roll. As he comes down, he'll be in better position for the missile shot. Dosay pulls hard back.
So as I barrel roll up out of fighter pilot good habits, I was looking around and I saw 2 more MiG-21s in fighter wing coming at us from our belly side, 5 o'clock position.
Dosay and Hawkins are here. The MiGs are here. Their best option is to turn into the attacking MiGs to keep the enemy off their 6. The Phantoms break right. The MiGs roar overhead.
And so we accelerated to about Mach 1.1, 1.2.
The Phantom's brute power will leave the danger far behind, or so it seems. Suddenly, Jim McDevitt spots a silver glint. It's a MiG-21 closing on Hawkins' 6. The Americans react instinctively, turning towards each other in an attempt to foil the MiG's attack.
Just as we were starting this break turn into each other, the MiG-21 fired an ATOL missile, an air-to-air missile, and it went streaking out towards Hawk.
The missile detonates close to Austin Hawkins' Phantom. The big beast shakes off the insult. Now the MiG reverses, beating a hasty retreat. Dosay turns in pursuit.
Jim McDevitt says, Kurt, what do you have in mind? We don't have any missiles left. What are you going to do with this guy? And I said, yeah, you're right.
Dosay forms up on Hawkins. And together they head back to the Constellation. BF-92 has a new MiG killer. The all-out attack by the Constellation's air wing on a single target, a so-called Alpha Strike, has been successful. Flames leak from burning petroleum tanks in the port of Haiphong. Destruction of these key fuel reserves will slow North Vietnamese ground units for weeks. While the Navy's strike planes return, The next phase of the coordinated air assault is set in motion.
After the first strike, which was a Navy strike, the Air Force came in with a massive package to knock out the Paul Doomer Bridge and also bomb another rail yard.
At 8:35 a.m., they assemble over Laos before pushing into North Vietnam. The bomb-laden aircraft top off their fuel tanks on 6 KC-135 tankers. All the while under the invisible eye of North Vietnamese early warning radar.
They had a much more complex, orchestrated arrangement with tankers, with jamming aircraft, with cap aircraft to protect from MiGs and Strykers.
32 F-4 Phantoms carrying 65 tons of bombs compose the strike package. 28 Phantoms fly escort. Some 60 more aircraft fly in support of the F-4s. At 9:20 a.m., 4 F-4 Phantoms, Oyster Flight, push into North Vietnam. They fly in low, beneath enemy radar coverage. Oyster Flight is assigned to patrol the airspace ahead of the strike package and clear it of MiGs. Flying Oyster 2 at the extreme right is John Markle and his backseater, Stephen Eaves.
It was pretty well known that the whole package would come from the southwest towards Hanoi.
We had never flown at that low altitude before, so that was a new experience for us. I reflect upon going past a schoolyard and seeing kids playing volleyball.
Steve Ritchie flies Oyster 3 with his backseater, Chuck de Bellevue. Oyster 1, the flight lead, is Bob Lodge with his backseater, Roger Locker.
Roger Locker and Bob Lodge were widely considered probably the best aircrew in Southeast Asia.
Our design was that the enemy aircraft would discover Gibraltar flight at a higher altitude, and we could lure them into our range and engage them as they were heading toward Gibraltar flight.
Just 20 minutes after crossing into North Vietnam, Oyster Flight gets the call. 4 Bandits, 340 at 24. They're at 15,000 feet, 24 miles northwest of Hanoi. Oyster Flight drops tanks and turns to engage. Chuck de Bellevue in Oyster 3 begins tracking the MiGs on radar.
The radar would pick up a MiG about maybe 15 to 17 miles in front of you. If you locked on at that stage, very shortly after that, you were in range for a head-on shot.
Bob Lodge had indicated that he had a lock-on with number 1. Normally, number 1 is the one on the left side, and then we go down toward the right, and then we engage number 2. And that's when the engagement started.
Lodge fires 2 Sparrow missiles in rapid succession. Then John Markle fires. Markle's first is a dud, but the second lights. Chuck de Bellevue locks up a third MiG.
I've got a target on the scope. I lock on at pretty close to max range.
The volley of missiles climbs, accelerating to near Mach 3. Bob Lodge's first missile malfunctions, exploding when its rocket booster burns out. But his second missile tracks smoothly to the target. Seconds later, Markle's missile hits home. The pilot of the 3rd MiG, targeted by Steve Ritchie and Chuck de Bellevue, sees the destruction and brakes left. Ritchie and de Bellevue's Sparrow burns out short of the target and falls away. Ritchie flies head-on with the 4th MiG-21. The MiG streaks over his canopy. The 4th MiG is here. Ritchie is here. He will roll right, turn 180 degrees, and swing in behind the MiG.
The MiGs helped us out quite a bit because they continued straight ahead until we got into a rear quarter position, and then the MiG began a turn, but not a hard turn. I'm guessing about a 3G turn, which is a very easy turn for us.
Steve used the automatic acquisition feature of the radar, put the pip on the target, lock onto it. That gives him a full system lock.
The first missile fails to track. A second Sparrow races from the Phantom.
The second missile went under the belly of the airplane, exploded. And the pilot bailed out.
Oyster 3 barrels past the debris. De Bellevue spots the MiG pilot as his parachute opens. Meanwhile, Bob Lodge and John Markle have engaged a 5th MiG-21 that's roared into the fray. Its tailpipe glows crimson, just off Lodge's nose. It's too close for a heat-seeking missile. John Markle stays behind Lodge to clear his tail.
Two MiG-19s come flashing over my canopy, passing from right to left, and they look like they're in a hard right turn.
After surprising the enemy, the Americans have now stumbled into a North Vietnamese ambush. Markle calls out the MiG-19s, a heavily armed fighter with 3 30mm cannons.
I could watch them sliding back behind Bob, and I saw the condensation on the wings that they were shooting.
Tracers arc across the sky, but Lodge doesn't break. Explosive shells slam into the right engine. The Phantom careens wildly, hurtling earthward in a flat spin. Lodge desperately tries to regain control of the airplane. The Phantom rolls over on its back as the fire spreads up the fuselage. Roger Locker punches out. But Bob Lodge is unable to escape the doomed airplane. Now it's clear to Oyster Flight that they've stirred up a hornet's nest. John Markle dives for the ground to make a quick escape. The rest of Oyster Flight scatters. The gravity of what transpired is slow to sink in.
In an instant of time, what was a perfect mission went to the opposite end of the scale. Two of our best friends, a classmate, one of the best air crews, had been downed.
Roger Locker drifts down to the ground. landing on a ridge deep within hostile territory. He will evade the enemy for an incredible 23 days before being rescued. Despite the loss of Oyster 1, the melee adds 3 MiGs to the day's total. The 4 Phantoms bear the brunt of MiG activity, while the Strikers head for their targets. At 10 a.m., 4 flights of F-4 Phantoms head for the Paul Doomer Bridge, located east of Hanoi. They're armed with a new generation of smart munitions.
In 1972, American air power had several advantages. They had new weapons, laser-guided bombs, television-guided bombs, and they knew how to accurately hit point targets.
Bringing the Paul Doomer Bridge down will cripple the movement of supplies to ground troops in the south. The 16 Phantoms begin their run into the target. The lead flight, Goatee, carries electro-optical or television-guided bombs called walleyes. The rest carry laser-guided bombs or paveways. Goatee flight will hit the bridge from the side, the optimal angle for the tracking system of the TV-guided bombs. The other flights will hit along the length of the bridge. Ignoring heavy flak, Goatee flight pushes over into a 30-degree dive, releasing the TV-guided bomb at 15,000 feet. Napkin, Biloxi, and Jingle flight follow with their paveways on the bridge's length. Multiple hits are scored directly on and near the structure. Several pylons are damaged, rendering the Paul Doomer Bridge impassable to wheeled vehicles. The Air Force effort has succeeded. But as the clock winds through May 10th, the pendulum swings back to the U.S. Navy. At 1 p.m., another Alpha Strike mission is launched from carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin. Joining the cap is Showtime 106, an F-4 Phantom flown by Lieutenant Matt Connolly with his Rio Tom Blonsky.
I could cover everything to my right, and that's where Tom, my RIL, and I were looking, covering the whole strike group off to our right.
I don't think anybody expected the MiG activity that was about to be bestowed on us.
F-4 Phantom pilot Matt Connolly patrols just north at 18,000 feet.
I saw the airplane starting to peel down in dives. I continued, as I said, did that high cross turn with my wingman, and started out the other side.
Suddenly, a voice breaks in over the radio.
I heard this, "I got a MiG on my tail, I got a MiG on my tail." Not who it was, where he was, or anything else, and I said, "Where are you?"
Connolly rolls on his side and scans the sky below him.
And I looked down and I could see an A7 in this real tight turn, and right behind him were these 2 black specks. It could be nothing else. It had to be MiGs.
The bandits are MiG-17s, a subsonic but very agile dogfighter with a lethal reputation. To position himself on the MiG-6, Connolly will roll right in a steep dive, then roll back left to get in trail.
It must have been about a 60-degree turn to the right, rolling slightly inverted to get my nose on him.
Connolly tracks the lead MiG-17. His AIM-9D Sidewinders are armed, but he doesn't have good tone.
I knew I was way outside the envelope. I was probably 65, 70 degrees off the MiG, and I thought, this may be the only shot I get in the whole war. So, no harm, no foul.
Connolly fires a Sidewinder. The missile streaks off the rail, but immediately the MiG pulls into the vertical.
This MiG just pulled off the A7 and went straight past me. I rolled wings level and then just lit the burner and started to go back up towards him, just pitch back into the fight.
Connolly's maneuver reveals an awesome sight. As many as 20 MiGs and 25 American aircraft in violent air combat.
There were some F-4s, some A-6s, some A-7s, and MiGs. It was an unbelievable sight. I think I described it as almost like being in a fishbowl. The fish got all revved up and stirred up just everywhere.
A MiG-17 flashes in front of the F-4. Connolly deftly rolls in behind the MiG.
I pulled in like this and started pulling lead on him, using a right-hand turn. I was probably a mile and a half behind him or something like that.
The MiG begins rolling back to the left to check his 6 o'clock.
They had a very slow roll rate. He'd start rolling like this, and as he rolled like that, I'd start to overshoot, but I pulled back in, and they had the MiG-17s had a big shield that went over their head for ejection, so they had this huge blind spot behind them. They had a blind spot and a slow roll rate. So as this guy rolled from right to left, I just pulled in behind him.
Connolly is in good position for a Fox 2, an AIM-9 Sidewinder launch.
He's lost sight of me after those rolls, so he just rolls wings level. And that time I had a real good tone, squeezed the trigger. It went off and went straight up his tailpipe. The airplane just exploded.
I remember the aircraft shuddering as we went by. We didn't go through the debris. You could just feel the shuddering. I think it's probably heat as we went by. It's just unbelievable.
The Phantom roars past. Connolly snaps left back into the dogfight.
All of a sudden, here came another one. And it was almost a duplication of the first kill, the first one we knocked down.
The MiG-17 is in a right turn, just in front of Connolly's F-4.
He did the same thing and then rolled out. Because I was down to my last missile and I wanted to make this one good. And I had a good tone, and just as I squeezed the trigger, bang, the tone dropped off. And, oh no!
The missile begins to corkscrew towards the target.
And all of a sudden, there was this black puff. The whole tail just spun right off. The ejection seat fired, and I watched him come out. And then the drogue chute slowed the seat down, and then the parachute seat came off, and the parachute came out. And I remember being amazed because the parachutes are square.
Connolly and Blonsky have dropped beneath the melee. They'll need to climb to get back into the fight.
All of a sudden, here's this MiG, and I start calling out to Matt. Matt, we got one at 9 o'clock, and he's coming in close. My voice started going a little higher.
And I said, I don't see him. He said, he's right there. And I said, oh, that guy. And I thought it was somebody way off in the distance. I mean, this guy was right next to us.
The MiG passes underneath the F-4.
As he crossed underneath me, I should have peckled off the centerline tank, because I think it would have dropped it right in his face. When he came out the other side, he was right next to us.
Connolly will bring the nose up to roll over the top of the MiG. He's trying to initiate a rolling scissors, but he's at a dangerously low airspeed.
Well, I got up to about here, and the airplane completely quit flying. And it did what in the F-4 was called a post-stall gyration. The airplane just quit flying. It just decided, not enough airspeed, not enough thrust, we're not flying anymore.
The nose drops. The horizon whips across the windscreen as the F-4 enters into a spin. Connolly and Blonsky are tossed back and forth in the cockpit. The Phantom is out of control.
It's going to go nose down no matter what you do. And then it's going to make usually about 3 turns in one direction and then about 3 turns in the other direction. The worst thing you can do is to try and fight it or accelerate it. Speed it up coming out of that post-stall gyration because it's not going to do it. You're just going to aggravate the problem. So just put your hands in your lap, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
Connolly knows that as the Phantom plummets, it will gain airspeed and eventually stabilize. Connolly fights the urge to control the spin. After agonizing seconds, the F-4 begins flying.
We came out of the bottom and then basically couldn't see anybody, so started heading on out. At that time, I said that we were running out of ammo and we needed to get out of there over the radio.
Connolly is out of the fight. He moves the throttles into afterburner. The Phantom accelerates towards the Gulf of Tonkin. But in the midst of the same intense action over High Dawn, another Phantom pilot, Lieutenant Steve Shoemaker, with his Rio, Lieutenant Keith Crenshaw, will get his own chance at the MiGs. Shoemaker is flying CAP for an A-7 Iron Hand mission, a dedicated strike against surface-to-air missile sites.
I never saw a MiG, I never thought I'd have a chance of seeing a MiG. And so it just, nothing at that time was routine when you go on a combat mission, but I didn't anticipate the excitement we were going to have.
The odds that we were going to get in this furball with 20-plus MiGs was a long ways from my mind.
As Shoemaker concentrates on the escort mission, bandit calls from Red Crown increase.
Chatter picked up. But a lot of times your chatter is kind of in the back of your mind. You're kind of concentrating on flying escort for the A-7. When all of a sudden I looked up and a MiG-17 flew about 100 feet over the top of my canopy, which immediately got my attention. I called my RO, "Did you see that?"
I saw it. I mean, he was coming at us head on, so it was just like, oh boy, we're in the war now.
Shoemaker breaks hard right to give chase.
I turned and went after him. I was like a mad dog at a meat shop. I thought, my first MiG, I got to chase this guy.
As Shoemaker pulls around, the sprawling dogfight comes into view.
I can remember seeing planes going up, down, all which way. I really wasn't focusing on anything. I was just kind of took in the scene.
It was pretty crazy. It just amazed me, the amount of things were going on in that little piece of sky.
Shoemaker barrels into the melee and quickly spots a fellow F-4 with a MiG on his tail. Shoemaker breaks hard right behind the MiG.
I really had a bad angle off and ended up with the MiG, total plan view of the MiG about 200 feet right in front of me. And that was when you pray if you had guns. And I could have, it was just like frozen in motion. Time had stopped. He was just sitting right there and I couldn't shoot him. So I thought, well, I got to do something to get this MiG off my squadron mate. So I parked off a sidewinder.
Shoemaker hopes his missile will at least get the MiG's attention. But just as it leaves the rail, another F-4 rises directly into his flight path.
I first saw his canopy because he was coming up underneath, and I saw the missile, and I went, oh no! And the missile went right over the top of his canopy, and then the next thing I saw were these 2 big exhausts of J-79 engines right in front of me.
Shoemaker's airplane is knocked onto its left wing by the blast of hot exhaust. The stick nearly flies out of his right hand. Shoemaker wrestles the Phantom back to level flight and scans the sky.
I looked and I went, damn, it's all over. There wasn't anybody around. There wasn't anything left. I heard people calling, going feet wet, egressing the area. I thought, damn, I missed the whole thing.
But then he spots something below him, an F-4 with a MiG in hot pursuit. Shoemaker still has a shot at making the last MiG kill of this historic day. May 10th, 1972. F-4 Phantom pilot Steve Shoemaker has spotted a fellow American with a MiG-17 on his tail. Shoemaker rolls in to engage.
Just as I was turning to slide behind him, he saw me. And he made a hard turn. And so I made the hard turn and followed him. And we were in a left bank, and he was pulling a lot tighter in the MiG than I could in the F-4. And so we made a descending spiral down to the ground.
Shoemaker's chances of scoring a MiG kill are slipping away.
I'm thinking, it's not going to get any better. So I corked off another Sidewinder, and he was down in the bushes at that time. He was at treetop level, and I was maybe a couple hundred feet above him. And fired the missile, and the minute I fired, my initial thought was, you know, I'm all alone out here. Everybody has left the area, and I know there's MiGs around.
After firing the missile, Shoemaker will pitch up into a high yo-yo maneuver. This will allow Keith Crenshaw to clear their 6 o'clock. They'll also cut inside the MiG's turn, hoping for a better angle for a second Sidewinder. The missile leaves the rail. Shoemaker pulls hard back on a stick. Their tail is clear. He rolls over the top to re-engage the MiG.
We're flying by this big fireball, grease spot on the ground, and I called Shu's attention to it.
It was like a 2,000-pound bomb explosion. That's what it struck me as. So I thought, well, no MiG, a big explosion. It's time for me to get out of here.
The fireball is confirmation enough for the MiG kill. Shoemaker pulls up to begin his egress.
So I turned back right, and when I did, I saw a MiG-17 about 500 feet coming in on me.
Shoemaker turns into his opponent. The MiG shoots past him.
I thought, well, I'm getting low on gas, but I think if he's running for home and he overshot, I can roll back. I have a perfect shot.
Shoemaker is here. The MiG is here. Shoemaker will roll back towards the MiG, hoping to see his tailpipe as he heads for home. Shoemaker rolls left.
But I wasn't so lucky, because when I rolled back, he was rolled back up with me. So he was aggressively going after me. And I thought, well, I can stay and try to turn with it a couple times, but I don't have the gas to do that.
Shoemaker will rely on a tried and true escape maneuver that takes advantage of the Phantom's power. Just as the MiG noses up, Shoemaker will nose down slightly, hit the afterburner, and bug out.
When the MiG was up nose high and getting slow, I lowered my nose, tapped the burners, accelerated away, and just waltzed away from it. Don't know what he did after that, but he didn't follow me.
The newest MiG killer in the U.S. Navy leaves the hostile skies of North Vietnam. The action over the Hai-Dong rail yard was the biggest dogfight the Navy ever fought in Vietnam. In addition to Steve Shoemaker's 1 MiG kill and Matt Connolly's 2. Randy Duke Cunningham scored 3, making him the Vietnam War's first ace.
When I got back aboard the carrier, and after I landed, the commanding officer of the carrier phoned down and congratulated Tom and I for shooting down 2 MiGs. And he said, and then, do you know that Randy Cunningham was the first ace? That he shot down 3 on that same strike? I wasn't even aware of it. Wasn't even aware of it. And my comment was, always a bridesmaid, never a bride. So some days you just can't do enough.
The air action over North Vietnam on May 10, 1972, was the most intense of the entire war. American pilots destroyed a total of 11 MiGs, the most ever shot down in a single day. United States Air Force and Navy planes crippled key transportation and infrastructure targets and stemmed the North Vietnamese advance into the south. These airstrikes were the opening blows of a punishing air assault that would bring the North Vietnamese to the peace table in January 1973. But for the pilots in the air that day, success meant something totally different.
That was our job, was to protect the strike group. And that was our main job. We were target combat air patrol. We were supposed to keep the MiGs away from the strike group. And that particular day, I think we did a pretty successful job.